Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today our topic is brachial plexus. What is actually a plexus? A plexus is the combination of different spinal roots to supply a specific region of a body. Such a connection of the different spinal nerves to form different terminal nerves. Yeah, the intermingling between different spinal roots to form different terminal nerves which will supply a specific area or a specific organ in the body. Such a connection is known as a plexus. So a plexus which will supply the upper limb is called the brachial plexus. Brachial plexus is found from the anterior or the ventral rami of C5, C6, C7, C8 and T1 spinal nerves. Now what we have a rami, and what is the difference between a root? Root is actually the start of a or origination of a thing, जहाँ से कोई चीज़ शुरू हो. And rami or ramus is actually the partition of a thing. So wherever the spinal nerve starts, it will start, or spinal nerve or a plexus or anything which it starts from the root. When the root divides, we say it divided into 2 rami or 3 rami. So this is actually the difference between the root and the rami. I here have another diagram. This diagram has a cross section of a spinal cord. So spinal cord have two parts: a white matter which comprises of the cell bodies and a gray matter which comprises of the myelinated the white matter which comprises of the axons, the myelinated axons, and the gray matter which comprises of the cell body. So the spinal nerve is formed from the two roots of the spinal cord. One is the dorsal root and another is the ventral root. This is the dorsal gray horn of the spinal cord. This is the ventral gray horn of the spinal cord. The dorsal gray horn continues as the dorsal root. The ventral gray horn continues as the ventral root, and to form a spinal nerve. The dorsal root actually carries sensory fibers toward the spinal cord. Therefore, it have here a dorsal root ganglion. Actually, here the sensory nerve is like this. It is a pseudo unipolar nerve. So here is the cell body of that pseudo unipolar nerve. So this nerve actually makes the dorsal root of the spinal nerve. The ventral root brings back from the spinal cord the motor roots. So here, when it combines to form a spinal nerve, we say that spinal nerve is actually mixed in nature. So the dorsal root of spinal cord is sensory in nature, the ventral root of spinal cord is motor in nature, but when it combines to form a typical spinal nerve, such a spinal nerve is actually mixed in nature. So all the spinal nerves are mixed in nature. Now the spinal nerve will divide into 2 rami, a ventral rami and a dorsal rami. The ventral rami is more developed and greater in size because it supplies the anterior medial aspect of the body. The anterior medial aspect of the body has more organs and more muscles, therefore it is more developed. The dorsal rami is, as compared to the ventral rami, lesser in size and supplies to a lesser extent because the dorsolateral part of the body have lesser muscle mass. So dorsal rami supplies the dorsal part of the human body. Now the brachial plexus is made by such the ventral rami. The dorsal rami supplies the posterior aspect of the body. The ventral rami actually combine to form a plexus, which is here in this diagram shown. Such an intermingling between the ventral rami of the spinal nerves makes a plexus known as the brachial plexus. Now the ventral rami of the upper two, the C5 and the C6, combines to form a trunk, which is known as the upper trunk. The C7 continues, the ventral rami continues as the middle trunk. However, the C8 and T1, just like the C5 and the C6, combine to form a lower trunk. So we have the roots of the brachial plexus, which were made by the ventral rami of the spinal nerve C5, 6, 7, C8 and T1. Then we have trunks. Trunks were actually made by the ventral rami's connection. The different spinal nerves ventral rami combine to form the upper trunk, the middle trunk and the lower trunk. Then we have divisions. Each trunk divides into 2 divisions, the anterior division and the posterior division. But here we have diagrammatically, for convenience, drawn the posterior division of this one lower and the posterior division of the lower trunk upper, because all the posterior divisions combine to form another structure called a cord, which is known as the posterior cord. So the posterior division of all the 3, the middle, the upper and the lower trunk, combine to form the posterior cord. The anterior division of the upper trunk and the middle trunk combine to form the lateral cord, and the lower trunk's anterior division continues as the medial cord. Now we have here four parts of a brachial plexus: the roots of a brachial plexus, the trunks of a brachial plexus, the divisions of the brachial plexus, and the cords of the brachial plexus. The cords are then terminated as the terminal nerves, which are responsible for the motor and the sensory supply of the upper limb. Now, this division part is actually present posterior to the clavicle. The clavicle, the region posterior to the clavicle is termed as the cervico-axillary canal, because this is the transition area between the cervical region and the axillary region. So the divisions are actually present posterior to the clavicle. These trunks and roots are present superior to the clavicle, and the cords and the branches are present inferior to the clavicle. So we can divide the brachial plexus into two parts. The division, the trunks and the roots are called the supraclavicular part, and the cords and the nerves are called the infraclavicular parts. Now we have some nerves originating from the brachial plexus. So three of the nerves directly originate from the roots or from the ventral rami of the spinal nerves. The first one is the spinal accessory nerve. The accessory phrenic nerve. Spinal accessory nerve is the cranial nerve number 11. The accessory phrenic nerve. The accessory phrenic nerves comes directly from the ventral root of the C5 spinal nerve. Accessory phrenic, as the name indicates, it will help in the phrenic nerve from the C4, C5, C3, C4 and C5. So these nerves will supply the diaphragm, which is our major respiratory muscle. Then we have this long this long nerve. This is called the long thoracic nerve. It is made of the ventral connection from the ventral rami of C5, C6 and C7. So long thoracic nerve is made from the C5, C6 and C7 spinal nerve, and this nerve supplies muscle which is known as the serratus anterior. This muscle supplies the serratus anterior. Then we have a nerve called the dorsal scapular, such as the accessory phrenic nerve. Similarly, dorsal scapular nerve is also formed from the anterior rami of the C5 spinal nerve. This dorsal scapular nerve supplies three of the muscles: the rhomboids and the levator scapulae. The rhomboids include the rhomboid major and the rhomboid minor, and the levator scapulae. These three muscles are responsible for the elevation of the scapula and the retraction of the scapula. So these muscles are supplied by the dorsal scapular nerve. Then we have two nerves which arise from the upper trunk of the brachial plexus. Again, upper trunk was made by the ventral rami by the connection of the ventral rami of C5 and C6. Suprascapular nerve and the subclavian nerve. Suprascapular nerve supplies the supraspinatus muscle and the infraspinatus muscle. However, the subclavian nerve supplies a typical nerve, as the name indicates, and that muscle is the subclavius. Okay. What will be the root value of these nerves? So accessory phrenic nerve, as it arises from only C5, the root value actually indicates the spinal root of which the nerve is made. So accessory phrenic and the dorsal scapular, these are made directly from the C5. The long thoracic is made, its root value is C5, C6, C7. The suprascapular and the subclavian, they have a root value of C5, C6 and C5, C6. So they both have C5, C6 both. Now we come to the terminal nerves. So the terminal nerves, first we'll discuss the lateral cord. So the lateral cord is made by the anterior divisions of the upper and the middle trunk. Lateral cord, we have three major nerves. One is the lateral pectoral nerve. Lateral pectoral nerves supplies the muscle of the pectoral region called the pectoralis major. The lateral pectoral supplies the pectoralis major. Musculocutaneous nerve, which is both motor and cutaneous. We'll discuss these nerves separately each. But musculocutaneous nerve supplies the muscles of the anterior compartment of the arm, as well as it gives a cutaneous branch known as the lateral cutaneous branch of the forearm, which, as the name indicates, supplies the lateral aspect of the forearm. Then we have a lateral root. Again, the term root came. So the root means the root of the median nerve. So the median nerve's root, the origination of this nerve is actually from the lateral root of the median nerve. So there is a nerve which forms a root of the median nerve, which is known as lateral because it is lateral. Now there is another root called the medial root of the median nerve, which actually arise from the medial cord. So these roots, both these nerves, which are considered as the roots of the median nerve to form a specific nerve called the median nerve. Now, why these cords are called the lateral cord, the medial cord, and the posterior cord? These nerves are actually called because of their relation to the axillary artery. They are present along the axillary artery in a sheet called a neurovascular bundle, so or neurovascular sheet, which is very important with respect to when we give anesthesia for a brachial plexus block. We actually palpate that sheet, and the aim of our infiltration of the local anesthetics is into that sheet, protecting the vessel so that we do not inject intravascular. However, the goal is to inject most of the local anesthetic into that sheet, so most of our cords are anesthetized. Now, the lateral cord means it will be present lateral to the axillary artery. Posterior cord means these nerves or this cord will be present posterior to the axillary artery, and medial means they will be present medial to the axillary artery. Now, the lateral pectoral and the musculocutaneous nerves has a root value of C5, C6, C7, both C5, C6, C7, C5, C6, C7. The lateral root of the median nerve, similarly as these two, also have a C5, C6, C7, but it makes a nerve called the median nerve, which also have a root from the median nerve, so it will also have a root value from that root. So this will have a root value of all the roots of all the spinal roots of the brachial plexus. We will discuss in this in the medial cord. So median nerve we will discuss after discussing the medial and the posterior. So we only have discussed from the lateral cord, the lateral pectoral, and the musculocutaneous. Lateral pectoral supplied the pectoralis major, and the musculocutaneous supplied the motor fibers to the anterior compartment of the arm, which contains three muscles: bicep brachii, coracobrachialis, and brachialis. Now we have the posterior cord. Posterior cord has a formula ultra. So the first one is known as the upper subscapular. The second one is known as the lower subscapular, also known as superior subscapular, inferior subscapular. The other one is axillary, another one thoracodorsal, and the last one is the radial nerve. Radial nerve is actually the terminal branch of the posterior cord. Posterior cord continues as the radial nerve while giving off these branches. So the first one was the upper subscapular or the superior subscapular, the lower subscapular, the axillary, and the thoracodorsal, and the continuation, which is known as the radial nerve. So the upper, the lower, and the axillary, these three have the root value C5 and C6. These have C5, C6. However, the radial nerve and the thoracodorsal nerve, these have a root value a bit different. So thoracodorsal nerve has a root value of C6, C7, and C8, and the radial nerve has a root value of all the roots C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1, all of them. However, T1 is inconsistent. Inconsistent means in some people it will give contribution to the radial nerve, and in some people it won't give any contribution to the radial nerve. So now the supply of these nerves. So the upper subscapular, as the name indicate, will supply subscapularis muscle. The lower subscapular will also supply the subscapularis muscle along with the teres minor muscle, because we have the subscapularis, and below the subscapularis we have the teres minor. Then we have the axillary nerve. Axillary nerve will supply the deltoid muscle and the teres major muscle, which is below the teres minor. Then we have the thoracodorsal. Thoracodorsal, as the name indicates, the thoracodorsal nerve and the thoracodorsal artery both are supplied or both supply to a muscle called the latissimus dorsi. The name indicates dorsal. So latissimus dorsi muscle is supplied by the thoracodorsal nerve and the artery, which is known as thoracodorsal artery. Now we had one nerve left, which is known as the radial nerve. Radial nerve we will discuss separately, because the radial, median, musculocutaneous, axillary, and the ulnar nerve, these are the major branches which will go deep into the arm and the forearm and supply a whole of our upper limb. These nerves are actually smaller in nature. Lateral pectoral, this is responsible for the supply of only one muscle. Similarly, we have some more muscle, median pectoral and the medial cutaneous of arm. These are smaller nerves. But ulnar nerve, median nerve, musculocutaneous, axillary, and radial, these five nerves are the major nerves which we'll study deep. Now, From the medial cord we have a formula 4mu. 4 means 4m and 1u. 1u is responsible for the ulnar nerve, which we'll discuss in the last separately. Ulnar nerve. Then we have the medial pectoral. Just like the lateral pectoral, we have the medial pectoral. Medial pectoral, actually lateral pectoral supplied only the pectoralis major. Medial pectoral supplies both the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor, but only the sternocostal head of the pectoralis major, because medial pectoral nerve lies medial to the mid of the body, or the mediastinum. Therefore it is responsible only, we have two heads of the pectoralis major, one is the clavicular head and the other one is the sternocostal head. So medial pectoral nerve supplies both the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor. However, lateral pectoral supplies only the pectoralis major. Now the medial pectoral, the lateral cutaneous nerve of the arm, as the name indicates, it will supply sensory sensation into the lateral side of the lateral side of the arm. The medial cutaneous nerve of the forearm will supply the medial side of the forearm, and the ulnar nerve we'll discuss lately. These all nerves has a root value of C8 and C8 and T1. So similarly, there is a root which is known as the medial root of the median nerve. It has a C8 and T1. The upper one had C5, C6, C7. So median nerve comprised of all the roots, C5, C6, C7 from the lateral root and C8 and T1 from the medial root. Therefore we can say that median nerve have a root value of all the nerves comprising the brachial plexus. So there are two nerves which have the total root value of whole brachial plexus. One is the median nerve and another one is the radial nerve. ठीक हुआ, दीजिए पूरे टिप्स। Now